This is a remount of a show that we premiered here at this time last year, and it is a musical depiction of the history of the Portuguese in Newfoundland, the waterfront, the sailors, and you know, and an imagination of what they had endured. Also, our own fisher people who were out in their dories hand-lining cod. So it's just a celebration of the human connection through work, through the fishery, and through the social connections and the musical connections when they were ashore down on the waterfront in St. John's.
Duane, can you talk a bit about your role in this, how you got involved with it, and what you do here?
So my involvement, I mean, it all started with, you know, even just a simple email from Pamela Morgan gets me excited. So I opened this one up and, you know, she just starts describing, you know, the concept, you know, and her idea. And I mean, it all sounds totally fantastic. And I mean, and I wasn't in town, you know, because I grew up in Carbonear, where I was born. And so I kind of missed the actual era, but I mean, one incredible musician is Art Stoyles, who I did have the good fortune of being able to spend some time with and learn some music from him. And it was almost through him that I kind of, you know, got this affection for that whole time, and especially the music. So then, you know, when Pamela sends a note saying, you know, you're interested in exploring, you know, some of this music, I jumped on board immediately.
Pamela, what drew you to this part of Newfoundland's history? How did this all come about?
Well, you know, I grew up in Grand Falls and I had no sort of experience with the Portuguese before I came to St. John's. But when I came to St. John's as a teenager to work in theatre, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was just totally fascinated with the waterfront, because in those days it was purely like international. There were sailors from everywhere. And of course you could access the waterfront and you could get on the boats and you could, you know, have a few drinks and you could listen to the music and you could watch the soccer and all that kind of stuff. And then when I joined Figgy Duff, Art Stoyles, as Duane mentioned, he was the first accordion player in Figgy Duff. So I played with him, you know, and toured with him for years. And Art knew more Portuguese tunes than he knew Newfoundland ones because he grew up on the waterfront. And then Teófilo Sequeira, he was here around that time as a student. His father moved from Portugal to Lab City to work in the mines, and then Teo came to go to MUN, and we became great friends. And so he would bring me on the boats and translate and, you know, and elicit songs from people and all of that. And so, you know, that was kind of an immersion. Then over the years I visited Teo in Portugal, and I always had a fascination for the land and the music, because we're kindred spirits, you know. Our both of our nations are shaped by the sea and fishery, and so we have that connection, and I just thought it was time to explore it a bit more. One of the most special things about this whole journey for me was the opportunity to interview dorymen in Portugal who had been to Newfoundland and the stories they told. It was absolutely fascinating, and in fact one of them guested on one of our shows when we brought it to Portugal. And also the poetry of Agnes Walsh, which constitutes a large part of the content in the show. She took a lot of the stories that were represented in various accounts of the White Fleet here, and her own experience and her own poetry, which was, and that's why I got her to do it, because she's had an interest in it for decades, as have I. And over the years she's written poetry about it, but I commissioned her to write specifically for this. And she took a lot of those stories that came from the Portuguese dorymen, as well as from what we read in books, and turned it into beautiful poetry. And so there's some of that is recited, and some of it is used as lyrics in some of the songs. So the stories that we found from people, for me, is what makes the content really beautiful.
The actual stories behind the stories, I guess you could say. Like you'll come to the show and you'll hear, you know, maybe it's a beautiful poem that, you know, describes you know, being lost on the water in the fog and like a piece of bread floating on the water, and that's how you found your way home, was realizing, oh, you know, the mothership is over that way, you know, whereas there's a good chance that person would have perished. That's an actual story that, you know, was told and
Yeah.
you know, put into the show. But, you know, so I guess just maybe keeping that in mind, that this all is actually, you know, history, and it happened.
The visuals also, we dug deep for those. Giampier Andreo gave us full access to his extensive collection, as well as Rui Bela in Portugal. So we have visuals, stills and moving pictures from both sides of the Atlantic, and that is also a feast for the eyes.
Oh yeah, I just got to echo that as well. Because, I mean, I remember when we were in Portugal and like we're doing one of the shows, and for us performing, we're on stage and it's behind us, so we don't actually get to experience it in the show, but it's just irresistible sometimes, and I'll just look back and have a little glimpse. And I remember one time over there, it was like a shot of, I think it was St. John's Harbour back in the old days, and being over there with just I guess the whole, but it's all just so beautiful as well. So there's an immediate kind of quality that you get, but then that's I guess amplified by once you start to realize this is actually part of history and what we lived.
The white waves roll